Good morning. We're very excited to share with you the background of Hill Capital Corporation. This is our first public meeting, and it is a distinct honor to be at the Hill Center to share with you publicly what we've been working on for some time. As I get started, I'd like to point out we have two of our board members and two really the founding partners to help make this happen, Mr. Kevin Sprang and Mr. John Bergstrom. And so we would not be here today if it wasn't for John and Kevin, and in particular Kevin Sprang. So I hope you'll have the chance to say hello to them afterwards as well. I'm going to share a little bit of the background about Hill Capital Corporation, the problem that we see, and the solution that we think we can bring to bear in the marketplace. And most importantly, we're starting here today because we want feedback from this community. Hill Capital Corporation was founded with a very simple vision, and that vision is to create a pool of capital in which anyone can put money into that pool of capital, and that money will be available for local small businesses to seek investment from. It's an entrepreneurial solution to something we think that small businesses face day in and day out, and that is a lack of access to capital in our marketplace. Over the last 15, 20 years, as my career has built in finance, I've seen it a number of times where businesses have issues getting capital. And the smaller a business is under $100 million in revenue, the harder it is for them to get access to capital. We as entrepreneurs in this room know the closer you are to startup phase, the toughest it is to get access to capital. But what a lot of us fail to appreciate as well is that you can have a $5, $10, $50 million business as well and also have those issues about getting scalable capital to allow you to grow. And so the problem that we've seen in the marketplace, we were able to do research through Pepperdine, through Harvard, and to find that the capital gap exists in the marketplace. We've all seen articles about this, but there are a lot of statistics that are out there and readily available. Whether we're in a growth period or in a recession, the capital gap exists in our marketplace. And so we did research on a local level and found this to be true here as well. We worked with DEED, with the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, with the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, and we're able to put some kind of meat on the bone, if you will, and found that in Minnesota alone, there's 14,000 small businesses that need the kind of capital that we think we can help bring to bear in the marketplace. And so this is the funding void. I'm just going to show this to you really quick. This is low risk, low reward. This is high risk, high reward. This is friends and family type of money, a few $1,000s up to $5 million. This is what I like to call purgatory. When a business needs anywhere from a few $100,000 to a few $1 million, this is tough money. It's too little for the big institutional funds to get involved. And when you're starting to deal with a few $100,000, it's too much for us as individuals to come together to invest in and support that business. And our marketplace is lacking institutional, scalable sources of capital. And so as you get up this risk profile, right here you're dealing with the banks. They can help across the board. You have the small community banks, the large banks. Then you get into specialty finance like asset-backed loans, receivable financing, and now you get into private equity, into venture capital, into angel investments. $5 million and above, there's plenty of sources of capital. You get below that, and this is where the funding void exists. This is the problems that we have seen as practitioners. The solution that we would like to propose to not only this community, but also throughout what we like to call the Empire Builder Corridor, and in particular Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, to follow the Great Northern Railway. We'd like to propose putting together an investment fund where anybody can become a shareholder. And so what we have done over the last 12 to 24 months is we've put together the research behind this. We've made filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and we have put together an opportunity for people to truly come together, to be part of this, where we can take a page from our ancestors and to come together to, in effect, raise a barn, where we can work together to put together a pool of capital to invest into our small business community. And so this is what the economic model looks like. Individuals can come together, institutional investors from family offices to endowments to high net worth individuals, capital into Hill Capital Corporation, make investments into small businesses. Hill Capital Corporation is a for-profit Minnesota C Corp. We have 7 founding shareholders, 3 of which are in this room, myself, Kevin, John, and actually 4, the James J. Hill Reference Library. And we put together all the legwork to make this happen, and now we are looking to make this a reality, to put together a pool of capital to make investments into businesses where the bulk of it, 90% of the portfolio, will be made investments into businesses of $5 to $50 million in revenue that need expansion capital, growth capital of $250,000 to $1 million, looking to fund today's empire builders so that we can have future generations of people that can help spur entrepreneurship. And so to wrap up, we're looking for one thing. We're looking for people to help spread the word. We're looking to put together a tribe. If people believe in the power of entrepreneurship, and they believe that small businesses are truly the lifeblood of our economy, that's who we want to get involved with this. And it starts here today. It starts here today. This is a grassroots effort. It's a grassroots effort to spread the word. And we would like people just to simply know about Hill Capital, take a look at the website, ask us as founders questions. If they want to get involved, we'd like to make that opportunity available to people. And with that, I look forward to your questions.
Let me bring the microphone around to people for our recording.
So, Pat, why has no one done this before?
That is a terrific question, Rachel. So various forms of pools of capital have been put together. And most of the funds that have been put together are very focused on early stage investments. And there is a big need right there. And so what has happened over the time is a lot of those funds have failed to deliver returns to shareholders long term that are frankly acceptable. Because when you deal with earlier stage investments, like the very early startup phase, that's a very specialized form of investment. When we did our analysis in the marketplace, we said, where is there a need for a capital gap? And most importantly, Rachel, what is the economic model that we can create to make sure that we can have a sustainable, long-term, viable engine that will be a pool of capital for a community? And that's why we put together the foundation for Hill Capital Corporation, which will be making investments in businesses that are fairly stable, but are in breakout growth mode. And that's the chunk of the high majority of the portfolio. A small part of the portfolio could be done under that. But why this has not been done before, in large part, is because there's a cost involved with putting together a fund on the front end. And that's where the founders have taken a lot of time and a risk on the front end to help make this happen, to bring it to bear. And if it wasn't for those founding partners to make this happen, that's a big issue. John, you want to kick in?
Yeah, as one of the founders, I can't help but answer the question also. There definitely are larger versions of what we're doing. They're often called small business investment companies, an SBA leveraged entity. In Minnesota here, we have maybe 5 or 6 of them. They only do facilities that are generally 3 to 10 million in size per company. What we're doing is, in that chart showing the gap, we're doing smaller size deals. We're going to be willing to do $250,000, $500,000, a number like that. The existing larger entities that they call themselves small business, because SBA definition of small business, they go at the very top of that, which is, typically, companies with 20 to 50 million in revenues. Those are still small businesses, depending on what industry they're in, so they can fit into that category. We're going a notch down. We're not talking about startups, but we're talking about companies that have, Patrick says 5 to 50 million. I call it more 1 to 20 million is probably where we're going to be hitting most of them. Well, that's our size. Think of us as being $250,000, $500,000 at a time. These larger entities, so-called small business lenders, they don't want to bother with things that small. We're doing the hard work of doing smaller deals.
Yeah, and that's what John is referencing is this right here. If a business needs, 3, 4, especially 5 million and above, there's plenty of solutions out there. This is where professionally managed pools of capital fall off a cliff once you start to go below that $5 million. So the construct of what we're doing is not new. The target market of creating a smaller fund to make sure we're investing where the greatest need is, that's what's new. Yeah.
I'm a couple years away from needing funding on that level. So in terms of building your small army, what are you looking to get out of your small army now? What can I do for you in the meantime? And I had a second question. I can't remember now.
Sure. Well, you can follow up in a second. What we need today are the help of the community to come together. If this resonates with people, we would like people to speak about Hill Capital Corporation on social media, help people make sure they come to the website, come to one of our public roadshow events, and to learn about this, because that's what we need the most. We want to get Hill Capital Corporation in front of several thousand people over the coming months.
And you're trying to attract the people who need that level of investment right now?
We're doing two things. First off, to say what I'm about to say, I need to make sure that people know that there is an offering memorandum on our website. And so if people want to read all the legal technical details about who we are, what we're doing, that is available on our website. There's twofold to this. One is we want to make sure that community leaders, business leaders, know the Hill Capital Corporation name. Two is we want to invite new shareholders into Hill Capital Corporation. So we are selling shares of Hill Capital Corporation to join the founding shareholders. It's common shares. It's $1,000 per share. It's all the same. It's the same type of shares that's no different from what I bought as an individual, no differently than what the Hill Library bought as an institution. So this is an opportunity for us to truly come together. So we are looking for shareholders that represent all the economic hubs throughout what we call the Empire Builder Corridor, Wisconsin, Minnesota, into North Dakota. Because when we do that, there's two very powerful things that can happen for us long term. One is when we have a broad shareholder base, we will have the opportunity to get deal flow from a lot of different sources. So when the Acme Software Company of International Falls is taking off and needs $500,000, we want to make sure those business leaders in that community know of Hill Capital Corporation. The second thing it does is it really helps for us to do our due diligence and our underwriting more efficiently than we'd be able to do otherwise. Because then we will be able to ask those shareholders in that region, tell us about the founders, the management team. Are they good stewards of local resources? Are they utilizing the local community bank and so forth? So Hill Capital across the board has been designed to be very collaborative with all sources of finance and with all business leaders. So that is what we're looking for.
What's the minimum value?
1 share. Yes.
Great concept, and it's an exciting new entity out there. So I guess just for a point of clarification, your independent specialty finance groups, asset-based lenders, they typically are lending on some type of security, inventory, receivables, things like that. When you get to that funding void area, is it a funding void because there aren't assets to attach to necessarily, and so you're an unsecured lender, or is it because it's too small for them to want to deal with? And then the second question would be in terms of just give us a quick summary of your road trip. I'll say, as opposed to road show.
Sounds good. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
Do you have background in finance, I think?
A little bit, yeah.
Because you know that's exactly right. So once we get beyond here, this is where people lack assets, and this is why this capital gap exists today. Is because our businesses have become relatively asset light. Our businesses today don't need $1 million worth of servers in the back room. We don't need the level of buildings and inventory like we once had to have. And so the banks, frankly, I think from what I've talked to a lot of community bankers, they'd love to be doing a lot more things, but they become so hamstrung in their ability to only lend against solid assets. And so that's where you get into receivables, financing, and so forth. And so once you lack assets, all of a sudden your options become extremely limited, and that's what we have found for the big reason behind the funding void. The other thing is the simple truth of that drives Wall Street. It's just as much work to work on a $20 million deal as it is a $250,000 deal. And that's a big problem. And so it takes a lot of time and effort to be able to put together a deal to put $1 million at work. It takes as much time to put $10 million to work. And so the banks, by default, have all moved way up market. And so that's where this capital gap has become very pronounced over the last 2 decades. Your second question, Bob, our roadshow is kicking off, well, technically kind of here today, but in earnest tomorrow in Little Falls. We are going to start our roadshow in greater Minnesota, into western Wisconsin, into eastern North Dakota. We're starting in Little Falls, Rochester, Winona, Owatonna, Worthington, Fargo. And so that's where we're getting started, and all that's available right on our website. And then we'll ramp up our public roadshow here in the Twin Cities come the spring.
As opposed to your roadshow you're going forward with, I've just been seeing some of your updates on LinkedIn as to places you've been in the last few months. I was looking more for feedback on what's the reception.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, more than happy to talk about that, Bob. So over the last few months, we've met with a few hundred community leaders, business leaders, so that when we have a meeting in Owatonna and Rochester, we would have a co-host. We would have somebody that would give us some free space to use and so forth. And so we've worked hard to build those long-term relationships. And the response has been astonishing. Just in my world of finance, I've been so used to running across wet blankets, people that say, they have an issue with something. And as entrepreneurs, we see this all the time, right? I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. The response has been tremendous. And people want to see this happen. They have been very welcoming. That's why we've been able to start our roadshow right away after we got clearance to start marketing from the SEC. We've been able to set up all these meetings. And so I've been so pleased to see the collaborative efforts that are happening throughout our state. And I have to tell you guys, there's so many cool things happening outside of the Twin Cities. Co-working spaces in Albert Lee and Wilmer, and it's amazing the things that are out here. So one of the fun things with Hill Capital Corporation that I think is going to naturally happen is we're going to be a watershed of information of other things happening throughout the region and other resources that are available for people. So that is something that there's a lot of tangential benefits for what we can do to create an economic engine that can tie some of us together that are interested in sharing in the economic outcome of our small business community. Yes?
You answered my question along that, so I'm good.
Excellent.
I'm sure there's others.
I do not have, what is that, telepathy, or I don't have that.
Are you soliciting just accredited investors? And then the second question is, are you doing debt and equity financings or just debt financings?
Both terrific questions. So the vision that I shared with you right away was to create a pool of capital where anyone can become a shareholder. That's key. for anyone to become a shareholder. That's what has taken so much time and work. We are definitely taking the road less traveled. And this is the vision of Kevin Spring. He wanted to put together a pool of capital that anyone can get involved with, because Kevin is a big supporter of the entrepreneurial community. And what's really neat is some of our best entrepreneurs are not the people that have $1 million, which is the accreditation standard, among some other things. But that is why we've gone through the painstaking task of become a public reporting company with the Securities and Exchange Commission. All of our filings are out there. Anybody can read every detail. You have the right to ask every question you want and examine files. And so to answer your question, the long-winded answer is no. People do not have to be an accredited investor. Anybody can become a shareholder. Great question. The investments that we'll be making, the bulk of our investments will be in the form of debt. So how I like to explain this is that we're going to be viewing everything as shareholders. We want to invest in the equity of a business. However, to start that investment, it's often cheaper and easier for both parties to start that investment with a subordinated note. And that could either be convertible, and for sure we'll have warrants that will convert into equity. So when we look at returns long term, we'll have a portion of returns that will come from current income and a good chunk that should come from the ownership of that business long term as shareholders. So, yeah.
Yeah, so there's some elements of the question you just answered there, but I think it's a little bit different. At the reverse pitch last night at St. Thomas, a lot of talk was there about the investor getting their return and what their time horizon is. They had 3 different investors with different time horizons, different orientations. The gap that you're filling there is one. I mean, what's your time horizon? Like, how do you get your money back? What's your goal? Are you looking at 3 to 5 years and 10x? Are you looking at buying and holding companies that are older?
As the fund, as a shareholder in the fund, or as
the fund.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of details to that question. The really neat thing about Hill Capital Corporation as a publicly reporting company is that the shares are, in essence, tradable. So if somebody owns shares and would like to sell them at some point in the future, they have legal rights to be able to do so. So it's buying shares as you would in a publicly held corporation, with the caveat that we're not going to be listed on the NYSE or NASDAQ and have a lot of liquidity, but that legal right is there and available for somebody to sell their share. So that is something very unique in the world of private equity. The second aspect, and what's really important to us as well, is our dividend policy. We will be dividending out at least 90% of our profits back to our shareholders. So when we have income that exceeds any operational expenses, or if we have a windfall event, that will be dividend back to our shareholders in the form of dividend. And so that will look and feel very different from what one is accustomed to, making single investments, onesie-twosies, into small businesses. The rate of return, we don't know what the rate of return is going to be, is the short answer. What we do know is that we want to create an economically viable fund that is very much in line with its peers. And so the peers of private equity have rates of returns that are, in what we'd be looking at, like subordinated debt fund, a private equity fund. Those are the types of rates of returns long term that we would like to achieve. That's really the goal of this, is to create an economically viable model that works for the shareholders and is widely held and is in essence a community asset. So, what's that, Kevin? So the return that we want to get from companies, our cost of capital will require us to look at internal rates of return from companies in the high teens, low 20s. Some of that return would be in the form of current income. and a good chunk of that return would come from the equity ownership in that business. So if we had the rights to buy shares of a business and they got bought out someday, that return, along with the current rate of return off of that, that's what we need to do. So that high teens, low 20s, we cover the overhead of the fund. The rest of the returns are available to shareholders in the form of the changes in net asset value plus the dividends paid back to shareholders.
It might be good to explain that rate of return is the same level of expectation for these entities that do the larger small businesses, the ones that do 3 to 10 million at a time. And there's lots of them around. There's plenty. If you need $5 million in a subordinated debt, there are sources of that if you're a small business. And those guys are targeting 15 to 20% total return, just like we are. But we're doing the hard work of breaking it up into smaller pieces and allowing that to happen with much smaller pieces, which makes it harder. And that's why nobody wants to do it, is we're doing the hard work. And we're doing that in part because we're affiliated with a nonprofit. The people involved are community-minded. And we see a gap, and we think it's, but we do think we can make that same level of return. We just have to work harder. That's Patrick's job.
So I know that your focus is on helping reach the broader community, and humans are notoriously bad at trusting or investing in people who don't look like them. So I'm really curious what your approach is going to be towards making sure that you're investing across the whole small business field, as opposed to just in fields that kind of look similar.
Yeah, terrific question. Well, the first thing we did is we got the son of a potato farmer to join our team, and that's Austin Bogstad. Austin, I joke around about that because Austin every time we're out in the communities, he ends up making some ties to connections in Northwest Minnesota, which is really fun to see. On a serious note, when we are out there and introducing ourselves to the business leaders throughout the region, it's very important that we are seeding long-term relationships. So there's very much an element of we have the wonderful opportunity to celebrate the legacy of Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill's Great Northern Railway went all the way from Chicago to the Pacific, to Seattle, essentially. And so when we talk about the Empire Builder Corridor, that's really the entire corridor. We have plenty to do in Minnesota, $20 million alone, western Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota. Very easy to put that to work. We want to take a page from Mr. Hill's playbook, and that is to build the long-term relationships with the communities in which we're doing business. I think there's a part of Mr. Hill's legacy that has really been lost over the years. We know him for him being a very successful entrepreneur. We don't remember him so much for what I think he truly was, and that is a community builder. He's a pretty smart guy because what he did was he helped build those communities along the way to make sure they were economically viable before the rail kept getting built out. I'm pretty sure that's why he ended up building the only privately financed transcontinental railway in the history of the United States, because he made sure those towns and communities were taken care of along the way. When we were up in a meeting in North Branch the other day, the economic development director for Sandstone pulled us aside and told us a wonderful story about how James J. Hill and his son had come up to Sandstone right after some devastating fires and had built a 3-story stone building in Sandstone as a way for economic development to get that community back on its feet. And so those are some of the things that we want to be doing, and that really resonates with people. And so we will be doing a lot of wonderful events here, but just as importantly, when we get a good concentration of shareholders in, say, Worthington or Fargo or International Falls, by all means, we want to be going back to those communities on a long-term basis and holding events and so on and so forth, because we can't take this building out on the road, unfortunately, but we can take the resources that this building has to offer and the people behind Hill Capital, our greater community, and bring that back out into the communities that Mr. Hill's Great Northern Railway helped build.
Thank you, Patrick, for wearing your Rockies the right color to go. Hit the lapel button this morning.
Which, by the way, a son of a Great Northern Railway executive officer. So, Mr. Paul Taylor.
I'm a serial entrepreneur. I have the Rolodex of Kings, and in my right hand are postcards for next Tuesday's 6th annual Minnesota Entrepreneur Kickoff. The J.J. Hill Center is a host organization, and Patrick will be talking about the Hill Capital Corporation too. If all of you come, there will be at least 400 in the audience to applaud Patrick's presentation. So
there you go. There you go. Thanks, Paul.
So one last question, Patrick, would be what would be the next steps for folks who are interested in joining Hill Capital?
Yes, so if you'd like to get involved, please visit the website, come to one of our formal roadshow presentations, most importantly, help spread the word. And if we said something today that resonated with you, please take the time to fill out an indication of interest. You can do that online. I think Austin has a few of them in his hand, but that's simply a postcard that says, geez, I'm interested in learning more, or I know and have some space in Litchfield, Minnesota that you can come and have a presentation. If there's anything that you can do to help us get this going and make Hill Capital Corporation a reality, we'd love to hear from you. So that is what we're doing, so thank you.